Okay, so this is the SIG CLI meeting for July 19th. So we could get started with status updates for anyone that has any new status. So basically for me, the last few days I've been mostly doing a lot of code reviews. So we've been having a lot of pull requests and kind of in a shortage of people to help with reviewing code. So I'm doing a lot of those. And other than that, I'm also starting to work a little bit on some improvements and refactorings to the printers package. So I'm not sure what you guys think about it, but the printers package has a number of issues today, and mostly it's kind of we have a lot of things that are really not very clear, not very well designed. So we have a lot of things like I don't know, printer options, structs that go ahead and over a number of methods and functions. And so I'm starting some work on improving those that will also improve the reusability of the printers package, because today it's really hard to use them, and we have some packages other than the kubectl starting to use printers. So we are kind of in a need of improvements in the printers package. That is also somehow related to splitting kubectl to its own repo. So we are trying to kind of make the printers package useful by itself, and not very much depending on the kubectl packages and other kubectl related stuff. But that's basically for me, a lot of code reviews and working a little bit on improving printers. I also have another topic, but we can talk about it later after the status updates. It's related to proposing kubectl plugins as an official feature. So kubectl plugins is here since 1.7 already. So it's there for some time, but we are kind of considering it developer preview. So I'm thinking about proposing it as a official new alpha feature, but we can talk about it later. So anyone else would like to give some status updates?
So related to SIG CLI, there's this project that Heptio's involved in called KSonnet, and as part of that is this tool called Config. And so it's another command line client for Kubernetes, but really looking to be sort of more principled around sort of workflow versus a real sort of toolbox. Just wanted to make folks aware of that. Another thing that we're working on in SIG cluster lifecycle is there's a certain set of labels that are sort of well-known labels, and these things are kind of scattered all throughout the code base. And so it's one of these sort of refactoring things that we have to figure out as we try to extract things like kubectl. And so I'm starting to float a proposal on sort of establishing a registry for labels that is separate from the main code base. So that will be helpful eventually in terms of being able to extract stuff out.
Okay, Joe, what is exactly the kubeconfig new command about? Is it about client-side config like kubeconfig, or is it something else?
Yeah, it's essentially a command line tool that evaluates the JSONet and then also directly talks to the Kubernetes cluster to apply that stuff.
Okay, got it.
And and I think over time, and it's still fuzzy, it's probably going to be more opinionated around, you have like some of the problems we face with things like, kube control apply with prune, right? Because kube control really operates on this sort of soup of objects, it's very difficult to actually have a reliable workflow around a larger set of objects.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of go-to thing for an application that is made up of a bunch of objects is something like a Helm chart, but a Helm chart also implies server-side components and all sorts of other stuff. And so KSonnet really sits in this middle ground, where I think, this is what we're aiming for, where it's more of a bundle similar to a Helm chart, but it's and it can be used by Helm charts. It's one of the things that we want to make possible, so that you can take one of these and deploy it with Helm. But then it's also usable purely from the command line.
Okay,
sort of
nice.
Thread through that.
It doesn't require a server side like Tiller in Helm.
Exactly. And so what's fascinating is inside of Google, there's actually two commands for interacting with Borg. There's this sort of raw command called Borg. That's not confusing at all. Which is very much of, Borg is not RESTful. It's more of an RPC thing, but essentially it's a wrapper around calling those RPCs directly. And then there's Borg config, which uses the separate DSL, and that's more akin to something like Terraform. And so, none of this stuff maps directly into Kubernetes. It's kind of all echoes, but so far, kubectl has been mostly sort of the raw stuff with sort of hints of the more sort of Terraform-ish type of thing sprinkled here and there. And I think, honestly, we haven't done a good job of communicating that to users, and I think it creates confusion. So some of the stuff that we're looking at with KSonnet is how can we actually build something which is a more pure expression of that sort of declarative write it down type of workflow. So there's that. One of the things that might be useful, and it might actually be, I'm not as familiar as I should be with the plugin model for kubectl. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's essentially a way to say, when you do kube control foo, it looks for a binary called foo and then just execs out to that. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. It's a way to extend kubectl with new subcommands. And but it provides you a proxy to the API and a number of other things. It has some integration so that plugins have access to the global flags, for example, and some other.
Okay. Oh, so it does provide. That's cool. I didn't know that it provided a proxy back through, so you don't have to do all the auth magic.
Exactly.
You can control auth. That's
exactly.
Cool.
You still have to use an authentication token. But it's something that we just provide to the plugin as an envor, and you just use that to access the proxy for the API. And it's a different token. It's not the actual authentication token.
It's just for that connection.
Exactly.
Okay, that's cool. So but then things like the printers then end up, like, if you want to have something that prints and integrates and looks like and feels like kube control, that is not anything that's sort of broken out in a super shareable way yet, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think, as we sort of get further with the KSonnet stuff, it might, make sense to think about this as an extension for kube control.
Mm-hmm. Okay, nice. Any other status updates?
I have spent some of my time reviewing kube control PRs, and also spend a part of my time working on the kube control extraction. We want to move some utility to the. We will have two new repo. One is the utility repo, which will include the generic utilities, and we will have another utility repo. It will include Kubernetes related utilities. So at this time, I'm working creating the utility repo, and after finish that, I will working on creating the Kubernetes related utility repo.
Okay, nice. Menchi, is that something you're working on alone, or is Jeff still helping with that repo split effort?
I'm working with another people in my team. Jeff just returned from vacation.
Ah, okay, got it.
I think he can also help me with.
Okay. Okay. What else,
So
guys?
I just have a question. Speak of that split the kube control to the independent repo. I just have a question about that API group and serialized internal type. Do we have to, keep our own internal type in our kube control on repo? It's like when you split the repo into an independent repo, it's like we have to drop some type. Like, do we have to keep the both internal type and the serialized type, or we just keep the serialized type in our, kube control repo? I think Menchi had an issue for this, question, and I think David is Jordan. They are working on some discussion, but I just don't know what it would be like. Because if we keep the serialized type, only keep the serialized type in our kube control repo, I think some unit tests will be really, a lot of work to do, right?
Yes, it's still an open discussion that, well, we don't have a clear solution for that. I sent the issue in the chat, so you are all welcome to comment on that. Daniel and David have give some options to us, but we need to evaluate which one we should pick.
Okay. Anything else in terms of status updates?
Fabiano, I also have a question about that fixed hardcode error message for OpenShift Origin to use. Have you ever? Do you remember that PR? It's a It's a error message occurring in kube control apply. We want to reuse that command in our OpenShift Origin CLI, but the error message was just hard code to kube control. We want to replace it with OpenShift CLI or OC command. So your suggestion is like include a new attribution of command. Could you?
Yeah, that's actually a problem we have not only in apply, but in a lot of places for kubectl commands. Basically, the string kubectl is hard coded in a number of places. If you check, for example, long descriptions and examples, it's hard coded in a lot of commands. And also, like you said, in a number of error messages. So kubectl string hard coded. And basically, my idea was that we try to make it's more structured the way commands are created. So if you take, for example, the cmd.go file under the kubectl cmd package, you will see that we try to, kind of conform to, a proposal like new cmd CMD name, like new CMD apply, but that's not an interface or anything like that. So what I was thinking about was to propose an interface or at least a structured function for how you create commands. And if you take, for example, all commands there today, you will see that some takes the factory and the in and out reader and writers as arguments. Some other doesn't take the out, the in as an argument. Some others don't take the error out as an argument. So there's not a clear, way for creating new commands. So the idea was to create an interface to conform those command creations, and that could include, for example, the complete, validate, and run functions. So they could be, explicitly declared by this command interface. And along with that, we would make the constructor like new CMD blah 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 take a new struct that would have some attributes like the reader in, the writers like out and error out, and also some things that we would use to like the base CMD name. In this case, the kubectl string that we would use, to in descriptions and error messages and all of that. So anyway, it's kind of an idea of improving the way we create commands, because today it's really not structured. We try to follow a convention, but there is nothing that enforces, that how you build the constructor and the other methods. But yeah, that would be the idea. Recently, Juan implemented a fix for a similar issue, and I added a comment there with a proposal, so I can send that to you. But basically, trying to make that more structured and actually enforce a way to create commands.
Okay, thank you. So that interface is outside the Cobra code base, right? We only need to change our code instead of Cobra code base, right?
Yeah, right. It would be in our code, and actually an interface that we defined. So part of that would be to also try to not be that much dependent on the Cobra structure, right? Because Cobra today is everywhere. So we would define our own interface for that, and not rely on, whatever Cobra proposes. But yeah, I would not require any change in Cobra. Okay, anything else? Okay, I have the CLI plugins topic for about proposing it as a formal new feature. So can you guys still hear me? Not sure. I saw a Zoom error message here. Anyway, so basically we have to decide here if we want to propose CLI plugins as a formal new feature for 1.8. So the feature freeze for the next release is on August 1st. And what it would mean by proposing plugins as a formal feature basically would be that, we would list plugins as a new formal feature in 1.8. Part of the release would probably require some documentation. We would still have to decide the level of support we would have, but probably at least for 1.8, it would be alpha or beta, but probably alpha. But anyway, that would we have CLI plugins here for quite some time already, still missing some pieces, but the basis for it is here for some time already, but we never made it, a formal feature. And along with that, we don't have any documentation for plugins yet, and making it a formal feature would kind of require that, that we start writing some documentation, eventually probably even a blog post or something like that. But basically the motivations for that is that I've been seeing people starting using it. So eventually, I got some emails or people pinging me on Slack that they are starting to use plugins. Some issues has been coming up already related to plugins, so it seems like people are starting to use it. So maybe we should make it a formal feature. Let me actually share my screen here so we can.
One idea, and this probably isn't necessary, but I think it definitely makes the case for this. And like, I know like the refactoring budget is like 0, it's like negative. But like, if we could take some of the current kube control commands and break those out as plugins and actually sort of dog food that as part of the core, the experience of what we have now, that would demonstrate that the plug interfaces are good, and it would actually help us to make sure that they're sort of sufficient and something that we want to actually keep over time.
Yeah.
Again, the refactoring budget is negative. I totally understand that, but like, with unlimited resources, that might be something that to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. I would personally love that. I think one of the major problems about kind of taking existing commands and moving to plugins would be that we don't have an easy way to install them today, right? So basically, you have to copy the plugin descriptor and binaries under .cube/plugins directory. So, but anyway, one of the places where we are kind of using plugins as a dog fooding is the service catalog set of commands, right? So
that's good. Yeah.
It's not an existing set of commands, so it's a new one. So probably it's one of the places where it applies well to being our own dog food of plugins. So there are really not much yet related to service catalog commands as plugins, mostly because I have to pull requests that it kind of requires and are not yet merged, are there for being reviewed. But currently the proposal is to use it in service catalog commands. It's not very easy to install them. We will have to think about, in future, how we make that easier. So I would love to have a way to, actually have a kind of package distribution mechanism for plugins, but not sure how that would work yet. So, but anyway, I wanted to share my screen, but I'm using upstream version of Fedora and it doesn't work with Zoom. So yeah, let me actually paste the link here in chat. Basically, that's the README for the features repository. So based on that, we would need to decide if we really want to propose plugins as a new feature. So it seems to me, that it would, be the case. So it's kind of big new stuff. It doesn't traverse many SIGs, so it's basically directly related to the SIG. So that was I was not completely sure about if it really makes a new feature. But anyway, I think making it an official feature would be good in terms of having documentation and having some new eyes on this thing we are calling plugins. So I would like to hear what you guys think about it. if we formally propose it as a new feature, it means we have to start to formally support it. So that's the caveat of this. But anyway, if we really want to move on with kubectl plugins, I think that's the way to go. So what do you guys think about it?
I think it sounds like a good idea. I think it's going to be, you know, the bar for alpha is relatively low. I mean, it's a chance to learn things. You can start getting the documentation, start talking about it. It's going to force us to think over the longer term about sort of, you know, long-term support and versioning, and like, you know, how are we going to support this for years, right? Versus something that's just sort of like, hey, let's try some stuff out. So I think, you know, starting down that path makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So this is a beta feature or an alpha feature that we're proposing as?
It would be alpha.
So so my understanding is for alpha features, like we can decide to just be like, we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah, that's, I'm not
You can
sure.
totally rewrite them.
Okay.
Or just delete them, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so those, we have to commit around beta, but I guess it makes sense to start the conversation now about what that would look like.
Yeah, one of the reasons I would also want to have this as a more formal feature is that I would like to have some new eyes based on security on kubectl plugins, because you know, we are opening a proxy to the API. We are introducing some token authentication mechanism, but anyway, that's kind of it's a proxy for the API, you know, already authenticated, meaning that you open that on the local host on a given port that would be open, for example, for anyone in that same machine. So I would like to have some eyes from people related to security and start doing some validation about our choices around security around plugins.
Was there like a Kubernetes security SIG or something where we can consult with? Or I'm wondering, like, I know a little bit about security, but not nearly enough to be confident in it. So do we have a resource, or what were you thinking?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I would have to figure that out. I don't know if we have a SIG related to maybe SIG architecture would apply, but I'm really not sure. But anyway, the idea is that I would like to have some eyes outside from SIG CLI, especially in terms of security, to, you know, validate some of our choices around specifically the proxy for the API. You know, there are some other possibilities around how plugins access the API. So for example, we could just simply provide the plugin the authentication token or certificates or things like that as envars, or even really don't bother about it and let every plugin take care of reading the kubeconfig file and using the token. But anyway, the idea is to have some external eyes based on those decisions.
Makes sense to me.
Okay. If there isn't any other major concerns, I'll go ahead and start with the process of proposing as a formal feature alpha for 1.8, if you guys agree with it. So as I said, we've been here for some time already, but I think even in terms of features, we were not there yet to be considered as alpha. Once we got the two pull requests, I have opened one related to the proxy API and the other full support for flags. I think we are kind of, you know, having all features that would be required for an alpha release. So I think that right now is the moment to do that. Okay, so That's what I've got. Anyone else has any other topics?
Hi. I just have another question about kube control diff last apply. Philip, you just suggest introduce a flag. It's like a diff waiver. It could open a external diff. But I just found that that flag is really, maybe it's not good to support it, because introduce a external flag for our code base will break the previous logic of that code, because we reuse the code edit command. So I was checking the kube control edit. It doesn't support like open an external editor flag. So it's just using a environment variable to support that. So do you think we can drop that flag? Because I really think I can introduce that flag, but I think it will break the logic of previous code and make the code readability really bad and make it really complex. So
yeah, I don't know. I'm not married to the
do you think
flag.
that flag is really necessary, or we can have a discuss whether we can leave it or not?
I don't think the flag is necessary. I mean, the only thing I want is that it like if a user could have it pop up a GUI diff viewer versus a is able to configure like what application uses to diff it, or rather if it opens in an application, or if it just like prints some stuff out of the screen. We can maybe chat after the meeting or outside this.
Okay.
But kube control apply diff, guys. It's going to be awesome. I'm excited about it.
I've been working for this too long time. It's just
yeah, Joe. One thing I'm hoping is that I know diff or the applied logic is confusing to a lot of folks, and I'm hoping that by having a diff, the ability to at least diff, users can like see what's going on. That might help a little bit.
Yeah, I think I was before you came on, I was talking about some of the stuff that we're doing with KSonnet, and I think it's going to head towards a direction of tool that is really sort of centered around the declarative work cases, binding in JSON with it. Having, like, if you've used Terraform, there's like Terraform Plan, which gives you a really nice idea of like, it's kind of a dry run, it's kind of a diff, it's kind of like, what's going to happen when I run this. Mm-hmm. And I think anytime, where you're doing ops stuff, having that sort of like, okay, let me just take one final look before I actually press yes, is a really good thing. So I think, having a diff is going to be, is going to be critical, and that's really exciting.
I'm also thinking, because there's some folks like Box who have like the automatic applier.
Yeah.
And it might be nice like for that to record the diff as a comment or something like that. Or rather attach it in some way to whenever it applies something, store it someplace.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
Yeah, if you have,
the interesting thing here is that as you move toward declarative flow, you're essentially moving the source of truth for what should be running in your cluster from what's actually sort of applied to the cluster to sort of source code management, something like that, right? And so essentially, like, we're enabling a reconciler loop here. And so sometimes there's a human in that loop, sometimes there isn't. The diff is useful for also to actually see, do I have to actually reconcile, right? So Like, because like right now you can just naively go like, well, just call kube control apply and see what happens, right? But if you have a monitoring system and you want to actually sort of do a mark of like, hey, I did a change, I did a rollout, you're going to want to attach metadata with that monitoring system, and that diff actually ends up being part of that. Like, hey, I applied this thing, here's the diff, and then you see your graphs go wonky and you can actually sort of say what changed, right? That's a kind of a nice thing.
Yeah. You get a diff of what changed instead of just like, we applied some stuff.
Yeah, exactly, right? And I think that's, it's definitely more information like that is going to be great. So yeah, very exciting.
Yeah. Here's what I just did on your thing.
Yeah. Here's what I did. I'm sorry I didn't want that.
Well, I think, the diff combined with like a dry run type of thing is
right.
Yeah.
A diff before you run apply. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I think, and we were talking about, we're having similar conversations when we look at kubeatom about how do we actually sort of do upgrades and stuff like that. And we're having a similar discussion around plan versus apply there. And whether we want to have like, do we want to have apply dry run that actually tells you what it's going to do? Or do we want to have a separate sort of plan command? And for these types of things, it looks like the pattern is to be more of a plan command versus actually having a set of options, right? And I think if we look at it something like okay, so like you do kube control run and you do -o YAML, -- dry run, right? That's an incredibly useful command because it essentially gives you a starting point for the YAML that you're going to be working with.
Right.
If instead we had kube control plan run, right, that's going to be a hell of a lot more discoverable, and it actually reads well for that type of stuff. And it's a small UX change. It's the same functionality in some ways, but it's essentially saying plan what you were going to do for your run versus actually just doing the run.
Yeah.
So just throwing out. So I'm just trying to noodle around like how do we actually take something like a diff and recast it in a way that's more discoverable and sort of more natural for folks to take advantage of.
Okay. Yeah. If you come up with something, I mean, because we're just talking about changing like the subcommand, kind of where it's structured, right?
I know, and I'm just thinking like this idea of like I'm always looking for these larger patterns because I like to pile work onto folks. I'm just thinking, what is the larger pattern here? Is like I'm about to do this. What the hell's going to happen? And I think we have a lack of visibility in lots of places across our tool set. So yeah, so it's definitely a huge step in the right direction. So very exciting.
And one thing I just amend is, so I like your plan run. I think that makes sense because I've been trying to figure out how to get people to do that. But I think we should move away from run in general and towards the create subcommands, because run only gives you a deployment. And then if you want to use like pods or stateful sets or anything else, like the syntax is pretty confusing.
But doesn't create just like run from a file?
No, there's create subcommands. So do kube control create -h, and now we have like create deployment, create stateful set, create config map, create secret.
I don't even know about these things, man. I suck. Okay.
Check them out.
This uses the same sort of generator that run uses.
Yeah, same idea. It's slightly different. If you were to edit the code, you'd say no. If you're a user of the code, you'd say yes. It's very similar.
Now, these actually execute them?
It's just like run. Although right now, because they were written separately, they don't have feature flag parity. But we're working right now. We have PRs open that will bring these flags into parity.
All right, fascinating. And these things are, but there's and there's stuff missing, like there's no job, there's no pod.
Correct. That is what we need to. So we need to get all of them in here. Pod, job, exactly. Stateful set. Because you can create those things from run now, but like the UI for that is horrible, right? It's like -- generator dot pod.
Oh God, I've done it.
And then the problem is, right, like the set of flags, like you list all the flags for all the generators you could possibly use, but like only certain flags work with job and other flags work with deployment. And it's really hard to figure out what works with what. So subcommands, I think, is going to be better.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating. I know my wheels are turning with this because I'm like, if you had, and again, like from the KSonnet had, if we had something like a JSonnet evaluator, having a stock set of sort of exemplars or templates that you could do, and then inspecting those to figure out the parameters and then generating these things makes this be such that like we can extend this for third-party resources. So that you can install a TPR sort of plugin to the create command that essentially generates the command line flags from some sort of one unified template, right?
Yeah, this is something I think that plugins would be very cool for. Like
it's a different type of plugin, which is the interesting thing too. Or maybe it's like a different mode for that the plugin gets called to say, give me your generators or something like that.
Yeah, we could do it. I didn't totally follow, actually, I think what you're saying. I was thinking of something more simplistic, which is like you can create a plugin that's a subcommand of create, right? So you create a plugin that's like kube control create X.
Okay, so what I'm thinking is that imagine, and again, this is maybe a discussion for the KSonnet world. Imagine that I had some sort of template file that was self-describing, and I could introspect this template file and say, what are the parameters there? Which is something that JSonnet supports. And you could essentially install that saying this template file ends up being used for, for create. And so you could say, you maybe just drop a file someplace that says, this is the new template file for the foobar operator. And then the create command says, oh, I have a template file for foobar. And then when you actually run it, it actually introspects that to understand the parameters and generates the command on the fly. And so creating a new create template essentially is authoring a single file and dropping it in the right directory.
You know what? I'm actually pretty sure we've had this conversation before.
Have we? I don't, maybe.
Because I remember you saying that. And then I remember saying, I think that's a great idea. And that I think instead of having the file dropped locally and someone downloading it out of band, we should attach it to the third-party resource as a subcommand.
Right, or even that could come server side in some sort of like, config map or TPR and something like the kubepublic namespace.
Right, it could be a config map, and the CRD has in its annotation the name of the config map with all of its template, right? And the config map with its
and that supports the mode of actually making be less
it's easier
moving towards things like the open API specs for essentially doing behavior here, but like different. Okay,
right. Like it would be really cool if you did kube control create -f on a URL. The URL had like a bunch of resources in it. It has the CRD, it has like several config maps, one containing the open API, one containing the template to do the auto create commands, and then the controller in it. And then effectively when you call create on that, you get like a first-class resource.
Okay, so I like that, but I worry about it also because are there cases where we're going to want to use these things without a server in sight?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
I'm torn.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd say worth having a follow-up conversation on. My gut feeling is optimize for the common case.
Yeah.
Like the user experience
hash values we could have. I don't know. Let's think about it.
Because like the CRD itself requires a server, right? So yeah, I don't know. Maybe Minikube can help out with that.
You mean getting the open API stuff for the CRD once like that essentially sort of closes the loop to know what the CRDs that are available are?
Yeah. I mean, I think the use case of like, I have a CRD, I want to work with the CRD that may or may not be installed in whatever server I plan on talking to.
Yeah.
It's not clear in my head.
Yeah. All right. Well, all right. So it's got my juices flowing. I didn't even know about that sub command. Like, how did I not know about that?
I don't know. I wrote. If you're interested, I wrote some docs on I think in the user guides.
Yeah, it didn't. I haven't seen folks use it. It's a great tip. I might write a blog post about it.
Sure.
Steal your stuff, man.
Go for it.
All right.
Publish it. You can even say you wrote it and it was your idea. I don't even care.
No, I'm not going to claim it. No, that's not me, man. Like everybody knows I actually like never get around to writing real code. That's my problem. And I'm really good at signing up for stuff and then not doing it. So I'm trying to actually sort of be realistic.
Awesome. All right. What else do we got today? Anything? Ten more minutes. All right. In that case, I'm going to run. Later, guys.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.